Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today on our webinar on the top criteria to consider when evaluating network automation solutions. My name is Morgan Stern, and I'm the VP of Automation Strategy at Itential. As my role is focused on strategy, I've spent a lot of time working with organizations on how best to evaluate and select network automation solutions. Today's session is intended to provide a distilled view of all of the factors that are most important during the selection process. If you have any questions, please ask them along the way in the chat window, and we'll answer them in the chat window. So let's get started. Before we dig into the top criteria, I always think it's a good idea to kind of set baseline. When we think about network automation, typically there's really three areas that we talk about. Starting at the bottom, it's really about the network technologies that the system is connecting to. And here we kind of focus on how do I extend my reach so that I'm able to interact with the systems and the technologies that are most important. In the middle is the automation solution itself, and it's really about how does the automation solution interact with sources of truth and other systems to enhance its ability to perform an effective replication of engineering and service logic. And then at the top, it's about exposure of supporting the different kinds of usage patterns. And we'll talk about each of these three along the way. Just want to set the stage here to say that we kind of think about each solution from these three different dimensions. So the first factor is around network focus. Given the fact that there are many automation solutions in the market today, it's really important that if you're focused on network activities, that you focus on solutions that are focused on networking. And the reason I stress that is that there are a lot of tools that have come up from more around like business process automation type of use cases that are really focused around being a decent general purpose automation solution and an automation framework. The challenge is that because they are focused on business process automation, they really lack a lot of the tools and the focus around network specific activities. So specifically, when you think about networking activities, there are a whole lot of engineering rules, analytics, evaluations that need to happen as part of a network solution that don't necessarily pop up in a generic business use case. And so what happens in the situations where people are trying to take a generic business process automator and apply it to network scenarios is they end up having to do a lot of custom development to circumvent the shortcomings in the platform. So out of the gate, you will be in an advantaged position if you focus on finding solutions that are really oriented around network technology because that eliminates all of the burden and work associated with doing the integration. So this point is network automation the core focus of the solution really bears serious consideration and part of your criteria. Building on that, does the solution support multiple network domains? Meaning there are some tools that are very network focused, but they're very specific to one kind of technology. Might be cloud networking, might be optical networking or IP networking. And what we're finding is that teams that go down that trail have some success, but then as the use cases become more complex, as they are in virtually every environment we move into, people are looking at really trying to automate across different technology domains. So they've got use cases where there might be some automation of their cloud assets as they're moving some of their applications and services across different hyperscaler environments. They may have requirements on the IP side of things, on the security side of things around doing firewall rules. So as you're looking at the tools, keep that in mind to say, is this going to be sufficient for the diversity of use cases that I have today and will have in the future? Ultimately, by looking at this kind of ability to support multiple domains, you're really becoming putting yourself in a situation where you can leverage the investment that you make across a broader set of technologies. Third point is around the integration ecosystem. And this goes beyond just being able to talk to different network domains, because what we see as people begin to become more sophisticated in the way they're doing their network automation and orchestration use cases is they're finding significant advantages to being able to connect to systems and tools that already exist in their environment. So if they've got a solution that's doing some kind of fault management, by integrating their automation solution with that, they can implement that as part of any new use cases, but then also be able to start to think about kind of closed loop automation scenarios where by interacting with the fault management system, I can get information that I can then use to make better automation decisions automatically. Additionally, there are situations where folks want to integrate with different kinds of sources of truth. It might be inventory systems or network controllers or databases in the environment. And having a system that is can flexibly integrate with all of those different kinds of applications really significantly accelerates your ability to get end-to-end process automation, which is ultimately where most people want to be. This is this is increasingly important as the ecosystem starts to evolve. Not only can the system integrate, but also what's the cost and complexity associated with doing integrations. At Itential, this is an area that we focus on a lot, and I recognize that people are evaluating other different solutions. But what we recognized was the long pole in many of these projects was the cost and complexity of integrating. So this is an area we focused a lot on. And subsequently, integrations are free for our customers. We provide them with tools, they can do their own integrations, and it greatly expands the use cases and the kinds of scenarios that they can develop into automations. Fourth is around adaptability. And I think that this is, again, kind of connected to the integration piece, but I view this separately to say, is the platform that you select today going to have the ability to adapt to technologies that are inbound into your organization? So things that are on the horizon and things that are getting more traction in the marketplace. Is this a situation where the platform that you choose is going to have the ability to adapt to those new technologies in a way that you can continue to use it and extend it to the new technologies that come in? Now, where you see this manifest is in a lot of kind of different aspects of the design of the platform. In some cases, the systems may be using very specific database schemas, and it's similar to being kind of bound to a single domain. But the idea here is if the system is based on capabilities and technologies that are flexible, then you have a better chance of being able to accommodate new kinds of technologies as they come in. We saw this in the shift when folks started to implement SASE, for example. Very different kind of technology architecture, providing security solutions, and your ability to integrate with that could be limited on some platforms that aren't really equipped to handle that. So the idea here is, as you're evaluating the platforms, take a look and see what's underneath within the internals of the system. How are they doing the modeling of the technologies that they're automating? And then what kinds of data constraints may the system have around being able to support a particular type of technology? Fifth is around skill sets, right? Ask yourself and ask your team as you're evaluating the solution, does the solution require any kind of specialized skill sets to be successful at building out end-to-end automations, right? Is this a tool that my engineers are going to require to become software developers to use? Or is this something where with a minimum of transition time, they can start to use the technology in a way that makes sense to them, that doesn't force them to rethink about how they need to get their job done? But instead, they can leverage capabilities like low-code environments to be able to model their subject matter expertise more directly into the tool or system. because what we see is when you do that, right? Why this matters? It gives you much faster time to value if the team can immediately start to use the solution and doesn't have that constraint of having to train up on any kind of software development capabilities, learn new languages or things like that. So it speeds up your time to value, meaning they will be productive much more quickly. And subsequently, your costs around bringing automation into the environment will go down significantly. This also means that you don't have to think about how you're going to retool your team at the same time you're trying to develop automation skills. Because what we're seeing is in some environments where if you make a choice around a platform that does require a high level of software expertise, well, some networking teams just don't have that, which means they've got to make some choices. They either need to hire new people in, they may need to bring in contractors, they may need to do training. It becomes a lot more um, challenging from just a team structure and competence standpoint than simply just saying, well, I'm going to have this person learn some scripting. Because the reality is, without developing on some of the platforms, without some level of maturity and software development skills, you quickly see real limitations in what your team is able to do. One of the side benefits of that also is it significantly reduces the friction that you may get from existing network engineers because they recognize that the tool is going to enable them to better use the capabilities and skills that they already have, as opposed to force them to learn something that they may not want to learn. Right now, we're in an interesting time in the networking industry, and I see this as less of a concern because a lot of folks in the networking world are pretty excited about learning new technologies. But I think the point here is saying, let's enable them to learn things that are going to help them move faster, not things that are going to cause them to kind of, in some respects, move slower, right? This also then kind of positions a larger base of folks who can interact with the system, meaning it isn't restricted to the one or two people that have software development skills. Virtually anybody on the team can have some level of interaction with the solution, which is really what you want. You don't want this to be constrained by a small set of folks. You want this to be pervasive in the organization. And one of the ways to enhance your ability to make it pervasive is to lower the bar, the minimum threshold of skills that are required to interact with that. So as you're looking at the solutions, really ask the questions. Does this require specialized skill sets? Does this require training for people? And if so, what's the intensity and duration of the training? And is this something that could be used by folks not only in a very small group, but in the larger organization in the team? Next, kind of transitioning and thinking about scalability. And the we talked about adaptability. Can my system that I select, can this adapt to new technologies? Scalability is really around growth to say, uh, is this solution as effective on the 100th use case as it was on the first couple of use cases? And as we're increasing utilization of the solution, does it have the capability to scale up transactionally to be able to accommodate the level of volume that we're going to need in the organization, right? So it's I think in really two different dimensions. I think in that performance dimension of saying, does my solution have the horsepower and the throughput to be able to accommodate all of the transactional volume that we need to ultimately push through this? The second part is really about the system itself and how does it grow and what are the things that the team needs to do to make that viable. So for folks who have gone down a do-it-yourself route and started writing scripting, right? That's a good scenario that kind of where folks in some organizations have hit a real ceiling on their ability to scale. In that, at a certain point, they found what was really easy to write a quick script to do one change turned into, well, I need to extend this, or I need to make more scripts. Ultimately, the management of scripts and the updating of scripts and the testing of scripts becomes a bigger source of like time sink than the execution itself. And so ultimately, the care and feeding of the solution became an impediment on their ability to bring on new use cases and to grow effectively to meet the needs of the organization. And also, in a lot of cases, they would be running things on different systems, meaning I've got to keep an eye on all these different places where I'm running scripts. And even using technologies to try to centralize that, it still becomes a little bit cumbersome from a management standpoint to be able um, to effectively run the system. So number six, scalability. This is not a thing that people tend to think of first, um, and the folks who don't think of it pretty quickly realize down the line that they've hit a dead end in what they can do. So we encourage folks to think about this upfront so that they can avoid that risk of running down a path that is going to give them some initial success, but ultimately becomes a real burden on the organization. Number seven is around deployment flexibility. And what I mean by deployment flexibility is, can I deploy the solution in a manner that's going to suit my needs and the needs of the organization? And really make it so that it's available to the people who need to use it when they need to use it, that it is going to be compliant with any kind of regulatory or security requirements that I need to operate within, that it fits within my current network infrastructure and operational model, right? Is this going to require my team to develop a new set of operational skills to be able to manage the system itself? Um, and is it going to be able to perform that across geographically and technologically across my organization? And so what we've seen in the market is this kind of evolution where some solutions have been very focused around on-premise deployment. Like, I've got to install this on-prem, which means I've got to allocate resource capability. I've got to allocate operational skill, which, in some organizations that have the assets and have the operational skill, that's a good way to have control over the system. But there are some organizations where that's not really a driver for an interest of them, and they'd much rather consume as a service. And so the idea here is to say, regardless of the solution you're looking at, is it going to be able, are you going to be able to deploy and consume it in the way that makes the most sense, given your requirements, given your capabilities, given the constraints that you may have put on by regulatory agencies? All of those factors become an important thing, because we start to see, as things like automation gain more and more traction, they absolutely gain the attention of the folks that are doing security compliance or regulatory kinds of things. And it's very critical to make sure that what the team is doing is going to be consistent with all of the other operational requirements that are placed on the team. Next is around ease of use. And I think we've talked about this in a couple of different ways. One is ease of use from a skill set standpoint for doing development. But here I'd like to kind of expand this to kind of encompass a few of the other factors that we talked about, but then also kind of highlight some specific things around here. Like, so here we're saying, is the solution easy to use? Does it require a whole lot of setup? Does it require a whole lot of development competence? Right. So a lot of factors that we've touched on all sort of congeal here around this one topic of ease of use. Why this matters: if it's too hard to use, you're going to limit uptake, right? You're going to limit your ability to get value out of the system. You're going to limit the number of people who can create and consume the automations. that you're really focused around deploying. And ultimately, a system that is not easy to use really just is self-limiting. And so here it's it's a combination, as I've said, it's a combination of, well, can I develop on this in an easy way? Can I create automations and orchestration flows relatively easy? But more importantly, like, can the operations people use it without requiring a lot of retraining or a lot of education? Because ultimately, as things expand, right? And this is a normal part of the way I think automation maturity happens, is starts with a small team of experts, and then pretty quickly it either sticks there or it starts to grow. And so while it may start with just network engineering folks, more and more folks in operations want to be able to use the tools. They may lack some of the deep engineering subject matter expertise to create the automations, but they certainly want to be able to use them, right? And if it's a situation where, because it's either like an arcane interface or it's just cumbersome to execute things, it becomes a real barrier towards mass adoption and subsequently high business value to the company of being able to really maximize how they're leveraging automation. Next is around CI/CD capabilities, and this is an area we've been talking a lot about for probably the last year or so. We've had a series of webinars, we've published a lot of articles, and this has been driven by activity that we've seen in the field, right? This is our customers, but then more importantly, the larger network engineering community that we interact with globally. And what we started to see was this real desire, and in some cases beyond desire, and actual implementation of trying to leverage CI/CD pipelines and other DevOps practices as part of the network change process. And the benefits are pretty significant in that um, all of the capabilities that became available to the software development world when they started to embrace DevOps and CI/CD and other kinds of principles around better automation of testing, better consistency of deployment, faster release cycles, all of those kinds of benefits are available for network use cases, provided the solution has the ability to support them, right? There's some very basic functionality that we see in many of the automation solutions out there. Folks talk a lot about infrastructure as code as being a principle for expanding their ability to automate their network infrastructure. And so that to me is just a baseline piece. And I start to look at, are there other kinds of CI/CD capabilities that become important, right? So if we tie into some of the points we made earlier around the integration ecosystem, this is a real good example of that. To say, can I easily integrate my solution with Jenkins or with GitLab or with some other pipeline solution? Can I easily integrate with testing capabilities? The more that I can do that means a simpler path towards integrating my automation solution with an existing pipeline, or in creating a new pipeline based around my automation solution. And so what I want to, once I do that, then I can start to introduce more automated testing in a very kind of reproducible, very scalable, very consistent fashion, as opposed to, I'm going to test it when I do my deployment on production, right? The networking world, I think in a lot of respects, can gain a tremendous amount by focusing on that sort of shift left mentality of saying, I'm going to do more testing earlier in my process. That way, I'm going to minimize risk. I'm going to improve my success rate. I'm going to reduce the errors that happen in production. And by implementing pipelines as part of your automation strategy, you get all those benefits. But only if the solution has got some good hooks into being able to act as a part of a larger pipeline and CI/CD implementation. So think about this as you're looking at tools and solutions and capabilities to say, is this going to give me what I need as my teams move further into net DevOps kinds of principles? Or does this present some obstacles for my goals to do that? And then number 10 is around exposure and self-service. And when we talk about exposure, kind of talking about that universe of consumers of the automation capability, that most organizations want to move well beyond the model of I get a ticket, my engineer kicks off a script, they run the automation and go, right? There are multiple steps in that process that can be further optimized by thinking about in the self-service model of implementing network automation, meaning can I, instead of having a ticket that gets manually received by an engineer who then needs to do some typing and some data collection, then they kick off the script, then they close the ticket. Can I integrate all those steps into my automation infrastructure? Meaning, do I have the hooks into the ticketing system? Or can I present an API to the users so that they can just ask for that change as opposed to having go through this manual process of I need to create a ticket, I need to wait for that to get serviced. You can eliminate all of that if the solution has the capability to do that. And it goes beyond just kind of the ticketing engineer based model, right? We're seeing multiple organizations implementing tools like ServiceNow, not only as a kind of ticket replacement, but also to satisfy a lot of other kinds of activities around service ordering, right? That if I want to provision a new capability for some of my users, I can offer that within the automation infrastructure and expose that as an API or expose that through integration with the order system. We talked about CI/CD, and that's another layer of exposure that for your DevOps folks, for those people who live in application development world, can I expose all of these automation capabilities to them in a way that doesn't require them needing to create an email or generate a ticket, that they can just use the APIs and use the other capabilities of the system to consume those functionality. So as you're thinking about how you evaluate your solution, think about that to say, what's the level of complexity that my engineers will need to undertake to expose what the work that they're doing and the capabilities that they're automating, to expose those to interested, internal or external customers. Once you do that, and some folks kind of consider that as a part of the evolution towards networking as a service. Other folks really just think about self-service capabilities. But this is really what we have seen pretty consistently in the community. This is a huge component towards unlocking tremendous amounts of business value, right? And it makes sense, right? If it makes it easier to run a workflow or an automation that saves 5 hours of work, if 500 people can access that as opposed to one, it's just math, right? And it becomes more and more valuable the more folks that can consume that. But that really requires the ability to expose it. That also requires the ability to expose it in a way that is secure operationally and security wise, right? So it can't just be, hey, if you want to do a thing, just log in and run this script and you're good to go. There's a whole lot of risk in exposing those kinds of things. So it's really about, can I expose it? Can I put the right wrappers around it so that I do this way, and that's in a way that's secure and consistent and consumable, and something that is really easy for folks to interact with. Okay, so just to kind of recap, these are the top 10. I think there are some others, but I think we've tried to kind of wrap as many things as we could into these, right? Is the solution focused around networking? Critical thing to distinguish between tools that are just generically good at automation versus tools that are network focused. Next is around, does it support multiple domains? So is this a purpose-built product for a specific vendor or a specific kind of technology? Or is this a platform that can support a consistent set of capabilities across multiple different domains and technologies? Third is around, what's the integration ecosystem look like? Not only can it connect to multiple systems, sources of truth, tools, but how complicated is it to do those connections and maintain those connections? Third is around adaptability, meaning, is this solution going to grow with my team in the future as we pick up new responsibilities, new technologies, and new capabilities are demanded by the network? Fifth is around skill set requirements. What do I need to have from a competence standpoint in order for my network engineers to be productive at using the tools? And does it mean that I'm either going to need to undergo a lot of training and the subsequent delays that training may introduce, or bring in new folks or change the team composition? That's another thing to consider. Sixth is around scalability. Is the solution going to be scalable both from a performance standpoint and just from a growth standpoint? And is it going to be maintainable? Seventh is around deployment flexibility. Can I deploy this in a way that's consistent with what my business needs? Meaning, can I use it as a service? Can I deploy it on premise? Can I deploy it on cloud as a container? Can it be deployed and operated in a way that meets the needs of the organization? Eighth is around ease of use. Not only is this going to be at the appropriate level of usability for the folks who are developing, but also the folks that are going to be using the system, meaning operations teams. Ninth is around CI/CD capabilities. Does this have the ability to hook into the pipelines that I have today or things that I may want to implement in the future? And 10th is around API exposure and self-service, meaning, can I expose this in a way that I can drive consumption, drive utilization of the tools, and ultimately drive greater satisfaction of my internal and external customers because I'm giving them more of what they need. I'm reducing the time to get to things done, and I'm giving them much more control over how they drive their requirements and get utilization of the network capabilities. Okay, so I wanted to take a moment to thank everybody who attended today, who joined our webinar on evaluating network automation solutions in the top criteria. I hope you found this very informative, and we're here to answer questions that you may have. Please just go ahead and enter them in the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer them. That's all I have for today. So wanted to wish you a good day, and thank you for attending.